Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. As many as 7 to 8 lakh Indians could be forced out of Kuwait if a new bill on expats is enacted into law. The Legal and Legislative Committee of Kuwait's National Assembly has approved the draft expat quota bill, according to which Indians should not exceed 15% of the population. The bill will be transferred to a respective committee so that a comprehensive plan is created. The National Assembly's Legal and Legislative Committee has determined that the draft expat quota bill is constitutional. The Gulf News reported that this could result in about 8 lakh Indians leaving Kuwait, as the Indian community constitutes the largest expat community in Kuwait, totaling 14.5 lakh. Of the 43 lakh population of Kuwait, expats account for about 30 lakhs. Kuwait is also a top source of remittances for India. In 2018 alone, India received close to 4.8 billion US dollars from Kuwait as remittances. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze Kuwait's new expat bill and its impact on India. Joining me on the program today are Anil Trigunayat, former ambassador, Professor A.K. Pasha, Center for West Asian Studies, JNU, and Dr. Wail Awad, West Asia expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right, Ambassador, let me begin the program with you first. Let's try and understand and analyze what you make of this latest decision that the National Assembly of Kuwait has taken, really, as far as the expat community there is concerned.
You see, this is not the first time that this is happening. In fact, if you come to think of it, all these countries in the Gulf have been trying to work on localization of their workforce. It has started in Oman, they call it Omanization. There was enacted bill in Saudi Arabia, then Emiratization has begun, then at the same time now Kuwait has started this. But I would like to refer something before we go into more details. In their labor contract, labor law, there was an Article 10, which prescribes the procedures and rules for the recruitment of non-Kuwaitis in a way that enables the ministry to control and regulate the labor market in accordance with the goal of the country to replace the expatriate personnel with the national manpower gradually. Now that has been done. In this particular law, which is because of the COVID impact, because of the oil prices going down, because of the problems that large number of expats have been impacted by the COVID virus, and their coronavirus. And that is why India also provided the rapid response teams to Kuwait in the first place. And Kuwait was also one of the first countries that offered to send Indians back at its own expense, because it could not handle. It was the first country after Iran to have suffered, especially in the Gulf. It was the first country, and it continues to have very large number of cases which it cannot handle. So that is one reason. Second reason is now they are trying to turn the ratio of the workforce from earlier it used to be 70% expats to 30% expats. So 30-70 instead of 70-30. Now this is what is happening. But you must have a look at it. India is the largest expat, as you mentioned, 1.45 million people. But at the same time, of the 30%, 50% are actually Indians. That is 15%, as you mentioned, is the 50% of the total quota that they are envisaging. So far, no, the law has not yet been passed. It is still being discussed in the parliament. Of course, the Prime Minister suggested it. But this is because of their local. Secondly, you will see that all over the Gulf, now under the Vande Bharat mission, we have seen more than 5 lakh people have come back. Now, more than 5 lakh, more than I think half are Indians coming from the Gulf countries alone. And therefore, it is going to have an impact for us as far as unemployment is concerned. But I believe that this is something that I'm sure that under our bilateral consultations and discussions, we are discussing it with the Kuwaitis and other Gulf countries, because we have excellent relations with them. But it is to do with their local economic condition, because of the impact of the COVID per se and their inability to able to handle this, and also to cater to their own unemployment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, all right. So, two aspects to take forward. One, of course, what the economic condition in Kuwait is, and also to talk about the domestic angles that are related to this entire issue as far as Kuwait is concerned. Let me take up that first, and then I'll go across to the economic angle. Professor, what is it that has prompted this particular move by the Kuwaiti National Assembly, is it more of domestic pressure as a result of the COVID pandemic, or is there more to it?
That is one reason, but the larger picture is related to the fall in oil prices and the declining oil revenues on which Kuwaiti economy is largely based. As you know, Kuwait is one of the major oil producing countries, and it depends substantially for its budget from the oil revenues. And for the last 3 months, the oil prices have come down, and Kuwait being part of the OPEC, they have taken a nosedive. So oil revenues and the COVID situation have aggravated the concerns as far as the budget is concerned. But Kuwait has substantial sovereign wealth fund and funds for the future generation, billions of dollars they have kept. There is no immediate shortage of revenue as far as Kuwait budget and financial planning is concerned. Right from 1970, when Indians have been going in large numbers after the oil price increase, we have been hearing this umpteen number of times. Whenever there is a fall in oil prices, they try to trim the expatriate, and Indians being in large numbers, that becomes headlines. And also this local domestication of the workers also has been going on. But we have to keep in mind that the infrastructure they have built over the last 50 years, plus it needs Indians and other expats to maintain and sustain that level of standard of living in those countries. Without expatriates, they will not be able to sustain the kind of life the locals have been leading, because many of the works which expats do, the locals are unwilling or reluctant to do, and they think this will be sustained with cheap labor from outside. And if you study the pattern of salaries, whenever oil prices have dipped, they have either tried to slash the salaries or increase the value added tax, or increase the price of oil, electricity, health services. So expats are seen as easy targets to mop up revenues. So this is, I see, one of the continuation of such attempts, and nothing seriously has happened. In fact, if you see the figures, the number of Indians have increased, except during the Iraq invasion of Kuwait in August 1990. The number of Indians working in Kuwait has been going out like in other GCC countries. So there is a perpetual demand, not only for Indians, but also other expatriate labor. So we have to see the big picture of oil price and the attempts for local nationalistic feelings. But lately, there has been some voice in the social media, given the domestic situation here, BJP and Hindutva and other elements. So the locals have been calling for restrictions on Indian labor particularly. And this was done in the 1991-92 Babri Masjid case also. I have written extensively on this, quoted. So on and off these demands from the local Islamic MPs in the National Assembly and other nationalist MPs, they keep tabling these things. But by and large, the Kuwaiti government is realistic and pragmatic enough to see the situation in its right perspective. And I think there's no need for too much of worry. And in any case, many of the state governments from where they go, they have plans in place for Gulf returnees. Those who are skilled, their labor will be utilized. But what I am likely to emphasize is, because of this low oil prices and the COVID situation, there is slowdown in the expansion of the infrastructure, housing and other sectors. So the non-skilled labor might be affected to a certain degree, but not the skilled labor, which is needed on a long-term basis to sustain the infrastructure which the Kuwaitis have built.
Absolutely. So we'll come back to that in just a bit. But before that, let me go across to Mr. Wahil Awad now. Dr. Awad, so, as far as this entire situation is concerned, do you believe that it is temporary in nature or it is here to stay as far as the economic slowdown in Kuwait is concerned? And as a whole, can Kuwait sustain, and how long can they sustain this entire situation?
Well, I think this law has been proposed many times since the 80s, and the parliament have not taken it up. It's just a proposal. It's not just a draft. It's not yet approved. This is one of the major issues. The second issue, during the 70s and 80s, where the economic boost was in the Gulf country, there was a huge expats, and there was lots of depending on the labor force. So Indian were number one in any of the Gulf country. If you take India is number one, and in particularly in Kuwait, there are 27% of the populations of the expats are Indian. So India take first, and Egypt come the second. So the issue here is not only the Indian; it is the whole of the expat community, and these are one of the major challenges facing Kuwait, facing the Gulf countries, where the demographic changes has been taking place. And I think there is another issue to it also, where we can see because of the COVID virus, COVID-19, we have noticed that the government of Kuwait noticed also there are illegal immigrants who have been settling in the country for years, who have no paperwork, who have been given general amnesty, and they were giving the government was ready to depart them on their own coast. And that's where they collaborated with the Indian government, and they were able to send back this much of a labor force. The issue here is now with the austerity measures and the economic growth is very poor in these countries, especially after the oil prices. Yes, there is also demand of the local, where the Kuwaitis themselves also, they have been graduating and they are not able to find jobs. So there is 1% unemployment in Kuwait, which has affected greatly and become a plague case in the Kuwait, despite the fact that Kuwait is considered one of the major Arab country or in the world, that it is have the largest GDP after Qatar. So there is a huge, economic problem impact. And COVID virus, they have realized within the parliament of Kuwait that there are billions of dollars spent by the government of Kuwait wasted unnecessarily for what? Because that is why they were very keen on sending all these workers out. So I would look at the issue from a big challenge in the future, because these countries does not want to have the demographic changes where the local population is lesser than the actual expats. And I think Kuwait is an example where the parliament, democratic parliament there, have been raising these issues to fight with the government, and they're calling the government of the malpractice and illegal immigrants, where they have, used lots of officials have used illegal way of bringing people into the country. So I think this have been come into the forefront because of all this. They wanted to solve it. And this solution is not as simple. It's a long process. Kuwait could be the first steps on this direction. And we need to see how can we this regularize. I think major issues for them, when we were speaking to the Kuwaitis yesterday, I was discussing with them. They said like skilled labor, like doctors, engineers, nurses, and major, company CEO, they will retain their position. But certain sector where the local people have accepted, for the first time, you can hear from the Kuwaitis that they're ready to work in those jobs which used to be taken by the expats. So I think these are the issues where now the Kuwaitis are trying to focus and trying to regularize these issues as a major step toward the stabilization in the Gulf state. And I think that will be, what we say, that the Kuwaitis may be the first, but India has to be worried. Yes, India has to be worried in the illegal laborers, not in the regular laborers.
Okay, all right. So India needs to be worried. One more issue that we need to be worried and concerned about, Ambassador, is the remittances that come out of Kuwait. Of course, close to $5 billion really, as far as 2018 was concerned. So that is something. And also, secondly, most of the people who are going to come back are going to be, most likely going to be unskilled labor. Now we'll have to find some kind of employment for them back home as well. So this is going to be a challenge too, especially during these COVID times.
Yes, I fully agree with you. And they already, so many people have come back. As I said, more than 2.5 lakh people have already come back, and then different states. And added to that is the internal return of the labor within the country. I mean, that adds to a major problem when the unemployment due to COVID has really increased. So that's a fact. Secondly, that almost 10% of India's total foreign exchange reserves comes from the Gulf countries as remittances. So that is going to be impacted. And Dr. Awad said that he indicated that it is probably not the first country. There may be others who might be entering into a greater localization of the labor force. I fully agree that the composition of the labor or the Indian workforce has also changed over time. It is, in fact, the financial sector and the audit and accounts everywhere. If you come to think of it, that by 2017 we had a very large number of Indian, but since then there has been a consistent decline in the labor force going to this as far as the immigration clearances are concerned. One more thing I want to say, that there is no illegal labor in these countries. The people, it is like that you work permit because the contracts are cancelled, so then you do not have a status legal. This is that. It is not the illegal migration in the context of other countries in Europe and all. So this is like your work contract expires, you have no option but to go back. And many of the people could not review, or the contracts had expired, so they had to come back, and they were sent by the by the Kuwaitis themselves. Now the problem for the government is now that the good thing this time they are doing is they are also creating a database of all the people who are returning, exactly what are their plus points as far as their skills are concerned. And then as the government is now trying to rejuvenate the Indian economy, whether it is through Atmanirbhar or through other things, we'll have to get their reskilling done. And in my view, I think all these Gulf countries also, especially, are trying to change their total production processes in consonance with the AI-driven Industrial Revolution 4.0. So they want to get into that area more. So therefore, the next generation of people, they'll need people. They'll go back. This has always happened historically. This will happen even now. But in the beginning, it is possible. If the law passes, obviously the people will have to come back, and that will be an immediate short-term impact on the Indian workforce.
Right.
I would also suggest that one more thing is, there are some countries where there will be reconstruction will take place, where there are countries where there will be, like countries, for example, Russia in the Far East, they have invited Indian workforce to come there. So if we can deploy some of them and train them properly, and they can be used, and the Indian industry, driven by the government initiatives, approaches there, we might be able to find some ways where we can accommodate quite a substantial part of it. So I believe that it is going to have a problem. It will have a short-term impact, but in the medium term, because we have excellent relations. One thing I want to mention right now is that all the Gulf countries, wherever I have interacted with the leadership, they praise the Indian workforce. They vouch for them. They are preferred over any other workforce from any other, whether it's Arab countries or from the South Asia. They always prefer Indians to be there. So if at all, that is going to be their first choice.
Right, Dr. Awad, I saw you putting up your hand. Go ahead. You wanted to make a point.
Yeah, actually, Ambassador Anil, I just wanted to tell you that the 300,000 Indian immigrants who came back to India, actually they were illegal, and that's why the government have given the general amnesty to them. And we should not also give them a clean sheet to all the Gulf countries officials. They are also doing malpractice, and there is lots of illegal labors in the countries, not only in the Kuwait but in the rest of the Gulf country, where people take thousands of workers and then they cheat them. There is no contract as such, and they are thrown in the street. And one more point I wanted to tell you, that the government of Kuwait have discovered there are more than 5,000 illegals and lawaris. They have no idea who is the father, who is the parents. So these people, as per the Kuwaiti law, they can get nationalities, not the other illegal immigrants, because nobody knows who their father. They were born there. So this is a major issue where there is a major malpractice, and I think they have to regularize it also, and to also address the issue and bring the culprit into custody and also the justice, because most of these people, poor labor, pay lots of money till they go to the Gulf country to work.
Okay, all right. Let me just shift track a little bit and bring in another aspect, a little known aspect as the general populace is concerned. Professor, not too many people know that Kuwait is one of the most vibrant democracies in West Asia, and it's also, a parliamentary system. So if you could take us through the processes and systems really that are followed in Kuwait for better understanding.
Yes, Kuwait, since it became independent from the British in June 1961, immediately adopted a written constitution, largely based on the European model with some inputs from India also. and very quickly they had elections to the National Assembly. And every 4 years they have been holding regularly the elections to the National Assembly. Parliament many times been at odds with the ruling family. The Prime Minister had to resign because of the no confidence motion by the ministers belonging to different fractions, etc. So, it is a question of conflicting pulls and pressures. The ruling Al Sabah family trying to maintain its stranglehold on the system, and the merchants and the liberal elements trying to put cap on the powers, because in the entire Gulf, it is only the Gulf Kuwaiti ruler who has a cap on the salaries imposed by the National Assembly. Nowhere else there is a cap on how much money the ruling family can spend on itself, like the British Crown. So it's an important, and the press also is quite free, and the elements of the committees, various committees also have shown quite important role over a period of time. Foreign policy, immigration and justice, and various other committees, quite deliberate discussion takes place. And although it takes place in Arabic, but immediately the very same day it is translated into English, and transcripts are allowed for the entire world. So in that way, the political system is political power is shared between the National Assembly and the Al Sabah family. They have to maintain a balance.
All right, then it's time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. Ambassador, I'm going to begin with you. I mean, it was a point that was made earlier in the program. I can't quite remember who made it, but do you believe that this is just the start of more such austerity measures to come in the near future as far as the West Asian nations are concerned?
Yes, this is, in fact, it has been there in the past, and there has been a consistent reduction in the expat forces, workforce in all these countries over the years, as the statistics indicate clearly. But this has been further compounded by the fact that all these countries are facing economic downturn because of the pandemic. It is possible that once the economies bounce back and their industry and the economy comes on track, it should be possible that they will require once again the people. But in the meantime, we'll have to prepare for the worst, and we must take care of our people. And as Professor Pasha mentioned, that this nexus between the agents on both sides need to be stopped, because that might lead to what Dr. Wailabad mentioned about some kind of illegal labor. Of course, we have institutional mechanisms between the two countries, and we have regular meetings. I have attended many myself. And both sides are aware of it, and they try to plug it. But at the same time, as it's a human, course, I mean, it's very difficult to contain it that way. But I hope that given our relationship and the extreme closeness, and being the whole of Gulf countries are our second largest economic and trade partners, I believe that the Indian workforce will be required there once again. But for the short term, we need to be prepared for the worst.
Absolutely. All right. So, Dr. Awad, as the West Asian nations look to diversify really and bring down their dependence on oil, we've seen this happen more so in the recent past. Most oil producers in West Asia want to really diversify and move out and widen the scope. Is this also going to create new opportunities and new avenues going forward?
Absolutely. There is opportunities, there are challenges. And I think, as you have rightly said it, yes, the opportunities come when these countries start looking for other sectors and develop it, and also improve their labor classes in it, because the labor force only was focusing mainly in the domestic, in the consumerisms, because of their only demands were within this limit. And also during the Gulf, the boost of the oil, there was also more of the growing of the infrastructure within the oil sector. Now, oil sector is down, they have to look for other challenges. And the opportunities are very high. Remember that in Indian expats are 8 million people are stationed in the Gulf. There are 14 million annually comes to the Gulf. There are more than $53 billion annually revenue come to India. And I think India enjoy a very close relation with the Arab country, and no worries about it. I think what India needs to know is to find more opportunities in different sectors. And I think this only comes with the collaboration and cooperation among the Indian governments and with the respected states in this. Kuwait maybe at this stage is facing a difficult time, But I think, as been said earlier, they are also a democratic setup. They are also having a problem, the parliament with the government. And these malpractices has to be exposed. And I think regularization of the labor classes from different countries, not only India, as I said, it is from the rest of the countries, has to be taken in consideration.
Absolutely. And Professor Pasha, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on the best way forward.
Yeah, we have to live with this kind of situation where there are calls for reduction in Indian labor in not only Kuwait but other GCC countries also. We have heard this in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE. But my own impression is that this is a temporary phase. Whenever the situation, as far as oil revenues are concerned, there is a slump. They talk about it, but they go back to the old places where they need the labor. Even if they want to diversify their economy from oil to non-oil, they need labor.
All right, then with that, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that this is not something new. It has been mulled in the past as well. It's a long process and it's going to take some time before we see it being completed. And also austerity measures are in place and we may see more of it in the months to come. This is something that we need to brace for, really, as far as our remittances and as far as employment for those coming back from West Asia to India is concerned. And also, this is temporary in nature and things will change once we see the end of the pandemic, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.